Shane Flanagan has been let go. Mutually has parted ways with the Dragons. They had the presser, as Magdalena mentioned in the intro, at 9:45 this morning. So they're on a 11-game losing streak. Their last three, they've lost to Souths, Manly, Cowboys. Their last win was in round 23 against the Sharks last year, and he didn't make it past round 7. So what are your thoughts straight off the bat, Hoffy?
Look, it was always going to happen, unfortunately. I believe they were just delaying the inevitable. The relationship became untenable if you just can't win football games. And look, they've been competitive in some, but they just struggled to play 80-minute football, which has been the disappointing thing. And look, the halves aren't clicking, whether or not you're looking at Atkinson or you're looking at Flanagan himself. Things aren't working there. And it's a shame because Shane Flanagan obviously had a view on the future. They're looking to sign a Keon Kolomatangi, which would be a great buy for them next year. But there's words of unrest, Jaden Sewer wanting out, a few other young gun players wanting out as well. So, look, they needed a change, and unfortunately the proof was in the pudding. Rugby league's a results-based business, and Shane Flanagan didn't get the results.
What are your thoughts, Lee?
They've only scored 98 points this season in total. They found scoring harder than sending a ship down the Strait of Hormuz at the minute, I think. Look, many clubs just keep changing the person without changing the conditions, though. And St George Illawarra Dragons is one of those unstable environments, full stop. There's, I think, probably unclear accountability behind the scenes, constant evaluation. I mean, there's no bigger game than sport for constant evaluation of your performances. And I think there's obviously a lack of backing and support in general at that joint. Shane Flanagan got sacked from St George Illawarra under the previous coach. And if you think about the organisation and how that's travelling in general, if he wasn't good enough for the organisation a few years ago and then a couple of years later is the head coach, what does that say about their long-term thinking and their strategy thought? And I think until these organisations start taking some responsibility for the environments they create behind the scenes and start protecting some of these people within them, it's going to be the same outcome each time. There'll be a different coach and there'll be the same outcome. And I just think that we've got other clubs that aren't performing quite as well. You know, I can't see the same thing happening at Melbourne if they have a few bad years on the trot because they invest in their people off the field. And look, right now, unless Dragons fix some fundamental problems off the field, they're going to have the same cycle play out regardless of who they appoint as coach.
So, Magdalena, you watched the presser this morning as well. What did you take away from there? Because it was quite an interesting one, including the chairman sort of having a crack at the media. They didn't name an interim. So what was the biggest takeaway for you from that presser this morning?
The emotions were very up and down with it. I did actually, when the chairman was speaking, I did appreciate how he didn't have a go at the fans. There's been a lot of unrest around the fans, a lot of speaking of protesting, the management of the club in general. So I did appreciate him not saying we need to just stop and support the club. I feel in those instances it can be really easy to say, oh, no one be negative, we've got to work with this together. However, when he did then merge into kind of having a go at the media and their response to the Dragons, I thought that was quite contradictory because if you're having a go at the media feeds off the reactions on the ground around the NRL, therefore the reactions of the fans. So I feel you can't defend the fans because you're trying to keep the club happy and support, but then on that, have a go at the media's reporting. At the end of the day, they've lost 11 straight games in a row. So, yeah, I didn't really agree with that point.
It's a fair point you make, Magdalene, because it's low-hanging fruit for the media, really, isn't it? Because they've got the evidence of 11 straight losses. I mean, what else is the media supposed to talk about and supposed to write about? I also want to touch on your point, Lee, about off-field. There's been a lot of instability around the Dragons. And we spoke on the boardroom a couple of weeks ago that the two merged clubs, St George Illawarra Dragons and the West Tigers, have probably been the most underwhelming franchises in the NRL in terms of results, and it comes about from a merger. And I think it's because these teams struggle for identity. Great to see the West Tigers heading in the right direction under Benji Marshall, but they've had a few false dawns before. And for the St George Illawarra Dragons, it's been since Wayne Bennett in 2010. That was really the last time they had any type of success.
And what's interesting about the Tigers, Hoffy, is that it's taken somebody like Benji Marshall, who is a West Tiger legend, not a Balmain, not a West Magpies legend, a West Tiger legend, to put some sellotape or sticky tape on this club, this organisation. I still feel that the West Tigers organisation is a little bit fragile. Every off-season we have some kind of boardroom coup or instability. Basically, these old franchises, are St George Illawarra Dragons, are they the Dragons, or are they Illawarra Steelers and St George Dragons? And I think there's some people in the suits who still hold some of those interests at heart, and until they solve that problem, until they get their identities, they're always going to have difficulty. I mean, you could argue, Magdalena, that this sacking, or this mutual consent thing, my arse, should have happened a few weeks ago.
Yeah. And I think moving forward, kind of looking at your point before, Lee, as well, on longevity, whoever they bring in as the head coach, they really need to focus on this notion of built, not bought. And I think that's what Flanagan didn't achieve. He bought all these players. He's got Cook, he's got Holmes, he's got Gutherson. At the end of the day, they haven't performed. Last week, or the game that just went, Valentine Holmes missed 10 tackles. You've got players in your junior systems that you can build up. And I know there's always this talk of they're in a rebuild phase. But I think if the Dragons are going to have any hope in the next 5 years, they truly need to hone in on this rebuild phase and focus on the development of their players.
So do you think, just for Hoffy, because last week on the boardroom, we talked about obviously the coaches and who was under the pump. And I think, a lot changes in a week, but when we're talking about Flano, we were saying, he either needs to win the next 3. And we actually, you were saying that you were sort of happy that they were giving him a little bit of time. Yeah. And he gets sacked the next week. We thought maybe Magic Round might be when he gets let go. But do you think the timing is right?
Yeah, look, I think so. And it's going to be interesting on their direction of a new coach. Magdalena mentioned that they haven't put on an interim coach as yet. They could follow the West Tigers route and go down a former great of the club. And we're talking St George Illawarra Dragons here. They've got Dean Young on their coaching staff. Dean Young's been assistant coach for a very long time. He's been up to the Cowboys, been assistant coach there. He's been involved in New South Wales Rugby League in Origin as an assistant coach. He was a part of that premiership winning team and under Wayne Bennett, so he knows what success the club is about, and the young name in St George is synonymous. Another option is Ben Hornby. Obviously, Ben Hornby, former player, played in that grand final with St George Illawarra, has a touch point of those players that they're trying to get from South, Colomatangi, for one. So they've got 2 great options there, and I believe that they're going to take the blueprint that the West Tigers have given them with Benji Marshall, to head in that direction to, as you say, Lee, bring about the merger properly.
What's interesting is the difference between this organisation and the Sea Eagles, the way they got rid of Seabold. He played on a Thursday night, I think, and Friday he was in the dole queue. And whereas you could probably argue that one of the reasons this has been delayed is because of the merger, the way the committee meetings operate, the way they talk to each other and communicate with each other. And I think the other thing I'd like to bring up, guys, is the only time St George Illawarra Dragons as a merged entity has been successful was under an old coach with a proven track record who had complete control of the football department. And I think if you look at the club like St George Illawarra Dragons, Phil Gould is somebody who was given complete control of football at Penrith. He's been given complete control of football at the Bulldogs. I wonder if they need somebody like that in there who can really act as a general manager type person to really set forth the next 20 years for the Dragons, not the next 20 rounds, the next 20 years.
I tend to disagree with you there, Lee, just because I think what we saw was with the Dragons, yes, they had Wayne Bennett running the show. He had control of everything. And what happened when he left? Everything just capitulated. Everything just capitulated. Pretty much set fire to the place before he left. So I'm not 100% sure that's the right direction, and that's what modern football is. I don't think modern football is these days as the coach running it.
What I did say though, Hoffy, is like a director of football type thing. So
yeah, but he can't be the coach as well.
So if you look, exactly. So if you look at, say, English Premier League soccer, quite often now, the man that used to be labelled as the manager is now called the coach, because the director of football essentially runs the club, and they tend to get sacked as a package now. And that's what's happened at the Dragons, Magdalena, too. The football manager or the head of football or whatever it is, he's gone as well. So I reckon this was their plan in a way, but they've arguably backed the wrong horse. Yeah,
and I do respect their decision, and I do agree with their decision to mutually depart with both. Watch our wording there. Got pretty angry this morning when someone suggested it was a sacking. But I do respect that, and that's where I do think they are searching for that new identity. They're having quite an identity crisis at the Dragons, as you were saying. They are a merger club, so they do kind of lack that history and connection with their past. And that's why I do agree with you, Hoffy. They do need someone like Ben Hornby. I would personally lean more towards Ben Hornby than Dean Young, because you just need to start again in some ways. Dean Young's already the assistant coach. There is some unrest around the club, or at least speculation about that, with his involvement in the coaching staff. So I think moving forward, they just need a fresh face that still inherits Dragon DNA.
Yeah, but I think the most important signing, and Lee, you touched on it, the most important signing for the Dragons coming up isn't necessarily the coach. It is their director of football. You're 100% right, Lee.
Interesting. Well,
we've got people like Brad Arthur knocking around who are looking to come back to Australia. People like Brad Arthur, Jason Dimitri, all looking to come back to Australia. The DNA coaches, if you want to call them that, Hornby and Young. So there's a few options. They could go down the avenue of Manly and get somebody who retired last year for a short sugar hit. Corey Allen, get the coaching whistle and boots ready. You retired last year from the Dragons, so...
Well, yeah, I was just going to touch on, before we move on, just the last couple of replacement options that we've had. So we had Ben Hornby, Dean Young. You mentioned Brad Arthur. There's Michael Ennis as well, John Morris, Jason Demetrio, Kevin Walters. Anybody there, do you think, that could potentially snag that job?
I think the only other NRL-ready coach, to go back into it, we're talking about Brad Arthur and Jason Demetrio. I'm not really 100% sure on the others, but I think it either has to be Dean Young or Ben Hornby, similar to Manly, where they brought in Kieran Foran, and I believe they should go down the Matty Ballin route, because something about being involved in an organisation and knowing what success at that organisation looks like is really important.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. So a big watch, a coach sacking, especially this early in the year. I know we said this about Anthony Seibold as well. Yeah. It's a very big story, probably one of the biggest of the year. So